Welcome, Dr. J's Beckett Sports Card Insights Hobby Hotline outtake episode. That was about an hour and 15 minutes, but I've distilled it down to 25, aggressively cutting, but a lot of meat in there. This was right after we had the collector's purchase of my old company, Beckett. So a lot of good questions. On with John Newman, Victor Roman, and then Chris Harris and Rich Klein jumped in halfway through. But thanks, sponsors: Top Spinini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggy Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, now owned by collectors. Wow, it's hard to say that. Anyway, here it is.
Did you know what was going on a little bit ahead of time?
No, I actually didn't know ahead, and I want to congratulate my former teammates. We always had a culture of non-disclosure of what was going on. Even as a medium-sized company, we really had a family attitude that what needs to stay on a need-to-know basis, and I wasn't in the need-to-know basis. And I'm very pleased they were able to keep it under wraps until it was rolled out.
Dr. Jim, this is your baby. I know it's not your baby anymore. You've moved on. You said, but it still always will have a place in your heart.
It's not a baby anymore. 41-year-olds are not babies. I started the company 41 years ago, and I sold it almost 21 years ago. On the other hand, I'm the founder, and I put my stamp on it, and there's still some semblance of that, but they've moved on. They've had other owners. And I think this ownership change has the potential to be really excellent for the hobby and excellent for my teammates and the brand and all that. I'm a rose-colored glasses guy. I don't want to be ridiculously optimistic, but I'm optimistic.
It's an amazing time to be a content creator, that's for sure.
But I don't really want to be the content.
I hear you. Me either.
Dr. Jim, you sat down with Nat Turner, the CEO of Collectors Universe.
It was a classy move. He texted me after the transaction and said, "Can we get together?" And I said, "I'm happy to meet with you. I'd like to know more, and I'd like to be of service." He came over to my place. Of course, then he got to see some of my collection. So we're on the same page about a lot of things. We're both hardcore, serious collectors. And of the people I've had in my card room, no one has had a sharper eye for the newer stuff than he had. He immediately, in every panel, could go to the card that was the more unusual, difficult, mainly of the newer stuff. They like the older stuff too. That just makes me feel good. I just think the people in the hobby that mess things up sometimes are the ones that don't really understand collectors. And Collectors, the company, is run by a collector as the CEO. Subsequently, I've had a further conversation with Nat and his key leaders. I think that went well, but I won't say talk's cheap because they paid a lot of money to have the talk, and they don't have any obligation to talk to me, and yet they did, and I appreciate that. I'd like to have a voice, but as I said, I don't want to have a daily voice, but I want to have a voice when something's going on. The headline is wrong if the headline is saying that PSA bought BGS. This is collectors buying Beckett, the brand, and all that comes with it. It's way more. The price guides, the marketplace, the publishing, all these things. Grading is the most obvious thing.
During your time with Nat, did you feel they are headed towards doing the same thing to BGS as they're doing to SGC?
Absolutely not. I did not get that vibe. That wouldn't make any sense. He's a really smart guy. We had a wide-ranging conversation. I saw someone in the chat asking, did we talk about shill bidding? Yes, we alluded to that, and we have no issues with that. A candid conversation about that and some of the circumstances about that. So he's very up on things, and this is a different acquisition. It's not a merger. They're much larger, but Beckett, the brand and the company, has things that can be added in and be useful to PSA, to collectors. Nat was very complimentary about the legacy aspect. Again, I don't want it to just be a past brand. I think he's excited about bringing it into the future. And like I said, I had a subsequent meeting with his key lieutenants, and they're seeing the same thing. They're not looking at how to wind this thing down. They're looking how to extract value and multiply their investment and make investment into it, which is one of the issues I brought up. I had an idea. I said, I just want to bring this up. I think this could be a big winner for you if you do it this way. just hear me out. And they said, we like what we're hearing, but we will huddle up and we'll get back with you. So very positive.
Nat reached out to you. You weren't going to talk him out of, obviously, the acquisition, but what do you think that was about?
The train had left the station. I said in my podcast, I've met probably with 10 groups over the last 10 years or so, mostly by Zoom or phone. I've met a couple of them at huge card shows, and a few of them have come to Dallas to meet with me about buying my company, the company that I no longer control or own, but they still wanted to get my opinion and get my voice. I'm very guarded when those people do that because, again, I don't want to betray any confidences or disclose anything out of school. I would have had the same tone with Nat if the deal had not been consummated. But the deal is done, and so I have no reason to withhold any strategic thoughts I have that are good for the brand.
Were you asked maybe to be involved in the future Beckett, now under new control?
I am involved. It has my name on it. Okay. And I have a podcast. So I am involved. Whether they want to listen to me or not, it's not about paying me. And it's probably not even about listening to me. It's really about listening to the people. But I'm going to have a podcast platform and I'm going to share the way I see the world. And I hope they'll pay attention. I'm not always right, but I'm usually right. Most people are usually right.
Collectivist Holdings bought control of Beckett less than a year ago. It sold to collectors. Usually a company will hold on to another company longer than less than a year.
That isn't what happened. Collectivists did not acquire the company. This was a kind of a refinance, may have been new lenders. There may have been some change. So it wasn't that they were sold to collectivists. Collectivists became the name of the entity instead of the older entity that had litigation and baggage and lending relationships that needed to be refreshed. In that sense, collectivists was probably never interested in being the long-term owner. But that was an interim step to clean up the company's balance sheet in order that there could be a sale or a merger or something else. But the company cleaned up and it allowed them to move forward. And that's why the last year was better than the year before. It's because of the structure of collectivists.
But they were the ones that would have to give the thumbs up to.
Absolutely. No, the sale, it wouldn't have happened without them. That was the ownership entity.
But the timing of it, less than a year after they became the controlling identity.
It was a lot of the same people. And in the private equity world, if you can get in and out in less than 3 to 5 years and still having a successful exit, then that's all the more credit to them. They weren't taking the first bid. They had a number in mind and they had a strategic fit in mind. And I think Nat and his team came along at the right time and said, how about this?
After the acquisition, Kevin Isaacson, what do you think happens here?
Candidly, he is very happy. I think he got a bonus for effectuating this transaction. And he is now back to what he really enjoyed, which is running Southern Hobby and Dragon Shield. He loves the international aspect. He was a remote CEO anyway. He's very familiar with the brands that were retained. And this is great news for him and his family. And he's a friend. But I think when Collectivist was in charge, there was a reformation of the board. But Kevin had their confidence and he pulled it off. And so I think he's very happy to be running Southern.
You don't have to have 100% of an industry to have monopoly power, okay? CGC is a strong second, and they have about 15 to 18% market share. Who knows? Maybe they grow to 30 to 35%. I don't know. PAG is around 1 to 2%. You have a bunch of other graders that are in the under 1%. But when you have one company that has that much power over an industry because they have this much market share, yes, that is problematic. And we're seeing it with upcharges, with constantly pushing back turnaround times, increasing the price of grading itself. Yeah, we consumers are already being victimized by PSA's practices.
Okay.
Dr. Jim, your thoughts when you saw this congressman's basically petition to the FTC chair about starting an investigation?
I thought it was a spoof. P. Ryan. I thought this
I know
was
what
crazy.
chances.
What are the
Do
chances?
you think this goes anywhere, or you think this is semantics?
It goes straight to a desk.
And that's it.
Actually, I don't think that hard if you're an influential constituent to get a congressman to write a letter. In fact, you can draft a letter for him and say, could you push this up the chain? And the congressperson is wise to say, yes, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I will push it up the channels. And so it is going to get pushed up the channels, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Again, that was part of my conversation with Nat, the monopoly thing, and Chris is spot on. There are illegal behaviors for companies that have monopoly type power. But my whole conversation with him and his lieutenants was moving forward and improving the hobby, bringing some additional alternatives, strengthening the Beckett brand. And that's not raising prices because you can. In fact, if you weren't a monopoly at 75%, how are you all of a sudden a dangerous monopoly at 78%? There are alternatives. Frankly, Collectors is not the biggest 600-pound gorilla in the hobby room. They're a distant third to eBay and Fanatics, each of whom could have bought the Beckett brands. They didn't. My conversation with Nat, he's very aware of the monopoly situation. And I think he's not the least bit concerned about that because he's going to navigate in a way that hopefully a year from now, that's a distant memory of, gee, I'm glad they didn't do that. And I agree with you, John. I'm disappointed in the way SGC has declined. And if that happens to BGS, then I was wrong. Then at that point, yes, that letter could get pushed up farther. But at this point, I'm taking Nat at his word that he wants to build back the Beckett brand. And frankly, as Chris said, if Nat was called into Congress, one remedy would be to sell SGC. I think he'd be more inclined to sell SGC, that they're very aware of its skill for sure, but it's way more limited than the potential that he has with the Beckett brand of bringing that out. And so if he's presented with a Solomon's choice, I see him very excited about the Beckett acquisition.
I could be wrong, but hasn't SGC already been sold multiple times? And wasn't it founded by the same company that later would go on to found CGC?
You were going back 25 years ago,
Yeah.
but in the early 2000s, we had conversations with SGC when they were in the previous ownership with Steve Eichenbaum, who is the CEO of CGC and a very sharp guy. We had conversations about either merging our grading or frankly, us acquiring them because they were very much vintage and we were having difficulty putting a dent in PSA. And this was in the early 2000s. I actually flew up there with Mark Harwell. We had extended conversations. It didn't go very far because they wanted to do a complicated rev share. And it just became too complicated. I thought we just need to either acquire you or not, and it fell apart. After that, Steve Eichenbaum, I think, allowed like a management buyout of the SGC graders. It was either an ESOP or something like that, which I thought, that's cool because they had some really sharp, fully invested graders. So the new ownership of SGC at that point, which was a couple of years later, still early mid-2000s, became the guys that had the big stake in it. I thought that's great. And that was what was bought by PSA. And CGC didn't even do cards at that time. They were NGC. And they had a huge coin business, and they were competitors with PSA in that. They had other investors in that company that I knew, but then they started doing the non-sport. And then they made the big splash, as you said, when they brought in a couple of our top graders, which I don't think would have happened if I'd have been there. But I can't say that for sure, other than we had a tight team.
The owner of SGC was Dave Foreman, and then collectors acquired them, and Dave rode off into the sunset. I've been told there were some promises made. What those were, whether they were honored, I don't know.
It's either promises or it's contractual. I will tell you that if there were contractual agreements, then collectors is not going to breach those. Okay. Now, if there were side promises, anytime you do a big deal, the verbal things don't count. Now, I'm not saying he went back on his word, but they're subject to interpretation. It needs to be in the contract, completely spelled out. And I would bet they fully abided by the terms of the agreement. And if you're saying Dave Foreman is unhappy now, I'm sad about it because he ought to be happy.
Could this acquisition actually help CGC? I think CGC might even benefit more than people realize.
Shifts down the monopoly thing because that is a very real possibility. And nobody's mentioned that CGC has common ownership with Fanatics. They are not underfunded. They're not a minor player. They're a bigger player. And they could benefit from that. And that's why this monopoly inquiry, I think, is not going to go anywhere. Now, if it plays out, this is a great opportunity for CGC. And they've already changed their messaging in a clever way to say that they're the company that's about the collectors. They're using the collector's word against PSA, that they're the choice for the collectors. So they're looking forward to competing with this combined PSA entity with these other grading companies that collectors owns, but are going to be run somewhat, mostly independently.
So if that's the case, why hasn't CGC broken out already?
They have.
They seem to be stuck at like 15 to 18% market share. Why haven't they gone up to 25, 30 now if people are just sick and tired of stuffing their cards?
You know, they're sick and tired of getting more money for their PSA grades. They're paying more, but they're getting more. If that formula didn't work anymore, I think CGC is a huge success story. Okay. They're just doing great. BGS would love to be at 15 to 18%. And we used to be at a lot more than that.
Used to be, and then they took
I'm just saying. So CGC is doing great. They're going to keep doing what they're doing, and they're going to present themselves as the underdog, and that's great. But in the meantime, if BGS is energized, if PSA, John, I'm in your corner, can re-strategize with respect to SGC to give them stability and an identity that's, I think, broader than a boutique. Boutique sounds pejorative. It's really not, but it's come to be pejorative. But they were the grader of choice for pre-war cards. There was a comment about when I sold the company, why didn't I just keep 10% or something and have a board seat so I'd still have a voice? I actually, in the 11th hour of my original transaction, I raised that issue. In fact, it was 20%. And they said, that's a deal breaker. We're either buying all of it or none of it. And I was ready to sell. But that would have been my preference. I agree. And that would have changed history probably in some sense. And then lastly, I would not be optimistic about this. I think it's good for Beckett, the brand, and I think it's good for the hobby. Because if it's good for Beckett, I think it will be good for the hobby. So I think it'll be financially rewarding for PSA, for collectors, but also for the hobby. If I didn't think that, I actually wouldn't be on this program, and I wouldn't have gone any further with Nat. I'd say, hey, you're on your own. I think it could be really good for the hobby. It's going to bring order and structure and resurrect a brand that has been tarnished and needs some polishing, needs some reconstructive surgery, but has great
You need
potential.
someone who cares.
Exactly. I care, but I am not going to get in the seat, but I don't mind whispering to the person in the seat.
What about serving on an advisory board or board of directors, if there is one?
I am already a one-man advisory board that nobody's listening to. So no, that's not true. Even the previous regimes, they listened, but some of the listening was after the fact. And that's what I've learned is that when they rolled out their grade change of the 9.5 thing and how to do that, they messed it up so bad. Then they wanted to talk to me after they messed it up. Why did it get messed up? I said, I could have told you. Why didn't you talk to me before? And so I've told Nat, I will not be holding my tongue. If I see something, I'm going to say it in advance. And I may be somewhat presumptuous, but I think I am the boss, but I am not. I'm no longer the boss, but I have that in my DNA. No one cares more about the brand and the hobby than I do. There could be a tie. I think Rich cares a lot too, and you guys do, but nobody cares more. And what I've learned in the last 6 weeks in this hobby, people were not gentle with me about putting words in my mouth. And so I'm not going to be mean-spirited about it, but I'm not going to hold back to say what needs to be said to Nat or anybody else. And so far, he's listening intently.
What do we think happens now with PSA, Beckett, and SGC basically being all under the same umbrella? We're doing the show a year to the day from now, December 20th, 2026. Do all three of these exist? Obviously, PSA is going to exist, but is SGC and Beckett still around? Is one gone and one still here? Well,
guys, I think it's in SGC's best interest to stay where they are. This may be the low point right now. I'm hoping there's too much installed base and collector confidence in the tuxedo and in the SGC brand. And if they ask my advice on that, I'll give that too. I'm not down on SGC. I think it's another diamond in the rough that now has a clear identity for non-registry stuff. It's the grader of choice for old cards.
I think PSA can utilize Beckett, the whole world of Beckett, to improve their product. And it doesn't cost them anything more since they've already bought the company. The OPG, the databases. At least 4 things Nat and his team can use from Beckett. They didn't have previously at PSA. PSA did do the due diligence. They do their discovery. They would not have purchased this at Beckett if they weren't comfortable doing so.
Rich, all those things were discussed with Nat when we had a private conversation as well as the broader conversation. There were 2 things where he looked me right in the eye and said, these things are damaged. Are they damaged beyond repair, or is there a way to bring that back? And in one case, I said, this thing is probably not going to make it. Don't throw good money after bad. And another one, I said, wait 6 months at least to see how it goes, and then you'll be able to make your own assessment, but that also could be torpedoed, okay? But all those other things and the major things he was saying, we're so looking forward to rolling up our sleeves.
Everyone wants a universal registry, right? A universal grading registry. Now with these 3 powers, if someone's going to put in that work, we'll get the closest to a universal registry with a PSA, Beckett, and SGC registry.
I told Nat I have a plan for how to do that. And when he's ready, which is not day one and it's not in 2025, but in 2026, I want that to happen. It's good for the hobby. And I know a way to do it that could be accepted in a way that there'll be a little bit of grumbling, but it's the best it could be. And so he said, sure, let's talk about that next year.
Next year's less than 2 weeks away.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I know. But he just bought the company on Monday.
Well, then I'm teasing. He could have been.
Well, but I don't want to overwhelm him, but he's coming in there. You pointed out there's a lot of moving parts, but as he starts dealing with those moving parts, and if there's a Beckett influence in there, and if these are things I thought about, I proposed to BGS to do a universal pop report. And they couldn't.
I actually remember that.
I know, but they just couldn't get it in gear. They had too many irons in the fire and putting out fires. But now if Nat's in charge, I could say, hey, I'm going to adapt that proposal. And I'm going to say, here's the way I would do it. And he can say, I like it or I don't like it, or tell me more. He'll tell me more, I'm sure.
Dr. Jim, you're doing the show.
Well, I'm evolving my show a little bit. I realize now that controversy is not going to kill me. I have the rose-colored glasses, but actually, Rich and I got some episodes in mind that are pretty mainstream, but I'm going to tackle a couple of controversial topics, but I'm not going to do it with a guest. I'm going to do it by myself So I can
So
just
you're
say
doing
what I
the
want
Hobby
to say.
Quick Hits version.
Not
this year.
exactly, because they will be hits, but they won't be hitting on people as much as this is an issue in the hobby, a topic that needs to be discussed, and try to discuss it rationally. And then I'll get feedback from people. So that's on the horizon next year, probably January. Nat is weaving a narrative toward going public. It's going to be a narrative filled with good stories. So this SGC is a blip. They need to correct that. But they need to be seen as the real moving force in this hobby, and that they've resurrected or cleaned up Beckett, which does have brand recognition. When they go public, that adds to their positive story, that they are more than just a grading company. They're the center of the hobby. And they will be public. He hasn't said that, but that's an obvious path for them. So the narrative is being shaped right now of how when they do go public, it's going to be a positive story of success after success.